afternoon and a very warm welcome to Conference Conversations, an online interactive talk show where we discuss key issues and questions related to the work of the Conference on the Future of Europe on a very regular basis. These conversations are organised under the auspices of the Conference Observatory, a joint initiative by the Bertelsmann Stiftung, the European Policy Centre, the King Baudouin Foundation and the Stiftung Mercator. And this observatory aims to observe, critically analyse and inspire the deliberations of the Conference on the Future of Europe and develop proposals to improve the EU's future participatory and democratic architecture. My name is Jacki Davis. I will be moderating this totally interactive discussion, and joining me today, delighted to welcome Daniel Freund, MEP, from the group of Greens European Free Alliance, who's a European Parliament observer on the executive board of the conference and a member of the Parliament's Constitutional Affairs and Budgetary Control Committees, Kalypso Nicolaïdis, who is chair in International Affairs at the School of Transnational Governance at the European University Institute, Dominik Hierlemann, senior expert at the Bertelsmann Stiftung, and Corina Stratulat, senior policy analyst at the European Policy Centre. Bit of housekeeping before we get underway. As I said, totally interactive discussion, questions from me to our panel, and I hope from all of you. If you want to ask a question, if you want to write it, click on the Q&A button, not the chat button, the Q&A button, and please be as brief as possible so I can see at a glance who your question is for and what you want to know. If you want to speak your question, as it were, click on the raised hands button and I will unmute you when the time comes to speak. If you would like to tweet out and share what you are hearing here, and we really do encourage you to do so, please use the hashtag Conference Conversations, or of course you can use hashtag Future of Europe or hashtag COFOE, but Conference Conversations would be terrific. So very quickly, Dominik, before we get into our discussion, just give us an update on where we are. What's been happening since we last met? And we're just about to take a summer break. Where are we in the process?
So where are we in the process? Hi, Jacki. Hello to all of you. So, well, I feel a little bit reminded of a situation. So because I'm approaching my summer holidays, where you've got the family on the beach and they are all trying to inflate that boat. So there is a lot of movements, but no clear direction yet. So the boat is getting bigger and bigger, then they jump into the boat and they are all paddling around, but you do not really know which direction the boat will actually go to. And I think that's kind of the situation we have right now. So the conference officially started. So we've got the multilingual discussion platform. So we had an event in Lisbon. We had the first meeting of the plenary in Strasbourg. So we see a lot of movements, even in member states. Some of them are actually holding their first events. Others are preparing more for autumn. We see think tank reports, NGOs are getting active. The 4 citizens panels that will kick off in September are currently diligently prepared. But all these jigsaw puzzle pieces so far do not really add up to a coherent picture of what the conference actually is, what kind of impact it should and will finally have. So, but before my summer holidays, I do not want to be pessimistic. I do not want to be a kind of sourpuss at the beginning of our conversation. But still, from September on, I think we need a different pace, more public outreach, and a more coherent strategy.
I will come back to all of those issues in our discussion. And just a couple of thoughts from me in terms of the things that were said at the plenary. And later on, I'll be asking Daniel in particular his readout from that first plenary. But Guy Verhofstadt, who was with us at the last Conference Conversations, co-chair, of course, of the conference, said he saw the conference as a relay race. And the Secretary of State for European Affairs and co-chair from Portugal, Ana Paula Zacharias, elaborated saying, we organized this conference around 5 Ps: people, participation, the platform, the panels, and then the plenary, with the baton being handed from one to other. I'd be intrigued to know whether you think, how you think that interplay is going to work. And just one last quote, Fabio Massimo Castaldo, MEP, a member of the Parliament's delegation to the conference, said during the plenary, I ask you to commit our hearts and souls to this conference, to reject any pre-packaged solution, taboo, or constraints of time. So, will that plea be heard? And how will the relay race that Guy Verhofstadt described work in practice. That's what we're going to discuss. But before we do that, Daniel, from your perspective, and as I say, as an observer at this conference, and you spoke in that opening plenary, how important is this moment? What is the potential of this conference to really make a difference, do you think?
The potential is definitely there. I mean, someone as a convinced pro-European myself, I would have preferred we go straight into a convention. That wasn't possible. This is what we could get. But I think this conference, if it works, can trigger something that brings about change in the EU. I don't think that over the next year, even if it is prolonged to 2 years or something, that we can upend everything, solve every problem there is in the European Union. But on a question or two, I think we can make real progress. And maybe, you know, not everything will be done right at the end of the conference, that we will all happily, you know, amend the treaties as necessary or pass the legislation that comes out of this conference. But you know, there will be that pressure. We will go into the next European election campaign, and each of the party families will have to say, well, are they in favor or are they against what came out of this conference? So it will shape that debate. I think that is sort of the very minimum that it will deliver. And beyond that, everything else is a bonus, I'd say.
And you said on a question or two, we might make real progress. I'd be interested to know where you think we should make real progress and where you think it really might happen. But we'll come back to that later on. Kalypso, Nicolaïdis, from your point of view, how important is it? Could it have a real impact on the future of the EU, do you think?
Jackie, you might be surprised that my response is an enthusiastic yes, because, you know, I'm kind of a bit of a critical scholar, sitting right now at EUI, but at Oxford too, have seen, you know, the ups and downs of democracy with Brexit. But in this case, what we have is really an experiment about an experiment, in a way. That is, the conference is supposed to lead to a moment in Europe where we somewhat reinvent democracy along the lines of participatory and deliberative democracy, and kind of enliven existing European EU democracy. So, so where we want to get to is an experiment, and the conference is an experiment of how we get there. This is what Danielle just said. And so, like Dominik, you know, I want to be resolutely optimistic about it, because in a way we have no choice. But Dominik, I liked your metaphor about inflating boats, and an inflating boat. And I was wondering if you would accept from me that, and a little amendment, that this is a flotilla of many boats, small boats, big boats. And the idea is that they're like in a kind of crazy, chaotic race. They're all starting more or less at different colors, different pace. But can we imagine that they all have a kind of shared beacon out there, and that beacon is this ideal of the fact that somehow democracy must belong to the governed. And I have in somewhere else, Jackie called this the need for a democratic panopticon. So I'll be happy to.
Which means? What is a panopticon? Forgive my ignorance.
Well, you might remember the philosopher Bentham at the end of the 18th century, who was trying to imagine how prisoners could be observed at one single guard in the middle of a tower, but they would never know when he or she is looking at them. So it's panopticon, and that has inspired rather dire, you know, visions of Orwell or surveillance capitalism, of all of this. But we could turn this metaphor on its head and say that the people could be the panopticon, the vision, that they're always monitoring politics. As individuals, you know, we don't have time, we can't do it all the time, so it's intermittent like the guard, but it's permanent if we put all our gazes and our imagination together.
Thank you very much. Corina, let me complete the picture in terms of how important you think this is. And I'm quite struck because I mentioned Guy Verhofstadt's analogy was a relay race, where in a rather orderly fashion, the baton gets passed from one part of the process to another. Here, we're talking about the boat. We don't know where it's going, or indeed Calypso's flotilla. Where are you in terms of that analogy? Which one fits best for you?
Well, thank you, Jackie. I think in general, it's too early to tell. It's too soon to tell. The positive thing, in my opinion, is that we dared to engage in an initiative that is in many ways unique. It's inclusive and experimental. The hardest part is always to get started, especially with something that is outside your comfort zone. And we are out of our comfort zone here. Many things could go wrong, yet it's great that we try, and it's amazing that we dare to experiment. We are at a point where we don't have ready-made answers or ready-made solutions to the problems and challenges that we face. So we have to be creative, we have to experiment, we have to dare. And even if this conference won't fix everything or much really, even if we end up getting some aspects of it wrong, completely wrong, it will still be important because we would have started to test new approaches and to look at our old models and our old practices from new perspectives. And that will anyway count as progress, I think, and we would have learned something at the end anyway.
Thank you very much. And Daniel, looking back to that first plenary, for you, what did we learn from that? Did you emerge from it more optimistic about the chances of it really working, less optimistic, or has it not changed your view? What was your sense of that first meeting?
I think there were pointers in both directions. Let me start with the negative aspects. First of all, for me, this was clear before, but I didn't manage to convince my colleagues on the board that we should have a discussion on an actual topic. I think we should have started this conversation. I mean, Europe is emerging from 18 months of lockdown, of pandemic, of lots of people losing their business, their job, loved ones. And to draw the lessons, what can Europe take away from this? The European Union has made mistakes. What can we take away? How do we need to change the European Union to make it better prepared for the next crisis? I think that would have been a suitable first debate for this plenary. Instead, we had a rather generic debate on what is this conference good for. We had about 120 statements, one after the other, rather short, not a discussion, but a series of statements. What was very positive was the mood in the room, because every time someone mentioned reforms, treaty change, abolishing unanimity, those kind of things, there was cheering in the room, there was support. And when the nationalists, the populists came with their ideas, there was dead silence. So if that is something that continues throughout this conference, and particularly next time around when the citizens are actually all in the room, then I think this can create a positive dynamic that we need for this conference.
Okay, so as you say, that mixture of the positive and the negative. And Calypso, just to follow up on what you said, because you said this is an experiment about an experiment, and you said it is supposed to reinvent democracy, but not everyone in the room, not everyone at that plenary sees it like that. Some complaining it's too ambitious. This whole debate about treaty change has already started, and we're right at the beginning of the process. Do you really believe it could lead to a reinvention of democracy?
We have to have the audacity of hope, Jackie. So I want to believe this. And I also believe that, when you ask European citizens, they have a funny kind of schizophrenia. They want Europe to do more. I think, Danielle, if you'd had this great debate, and I love the counterfactual that you posed, it would have been nice. It was a bit strange to have all these 1-minute statements, very perfunctory, reminded me of the convention I was part of 20 years ago, that ended in semi-failure, although not entirely. So, yeah, that was not very imaginative. But if you ask European citizens, they certainly on the what question, they want Europe to do more together. But on the how question, how, They want it to be closer to home. They want this to be done in decentralized way. They want to have access to it, that it not be obscure. So, you know, there is, and it's very hard to square the circle. And as you implied, Jacki, of course, there are kind of two worlds that collide in this conference. There is the world of high politics. There is the world of interinstitutional, you know, little bickering, and the parliament wants this and the council wants that. And Daniel is one of those wonderful bridges who tries to, you know, with a more proactive vision of what is to be done, you know, bring the institutions together. But there is that world, and it's the world of EU politics. You know, we can't just push it away or will it away, or of one, you know, only citizens at the helm. Let's not be naive. There is this world, but then there is the world of citizens saying, we want to be part of this story, especially young people who are supposed to make 1/3 of all of these different bodies, right? Well, these young people, they are digital natives. You know, I see my kids, they can be part of 5 conversations at the same time. They're pretty amazing. Yeah. And they know how to do these things, right? But how do you bring those two worlds together, Jacki?
Exactly.
Whoa,
exactly.
That is such a difficult thing. This is why Corina was so right. Yeah. You know, we can't ask that everything is gotten right at first try, because, you know, these institutions, they don't necessarily, you know, they're not used to this.
No, and indeed, Dominik, at our last conference conversations, Guy Verhofstadt, while being relatively discreet, was pointing to some of those tensions. Do you believe, Dominik, that this really is, do you share Kalypso's, we have to have the audacity of hope, that this can, in some form, lead to a reinvention of democracy? And from what you've seen so far, I mean, I think I sensed from you a frustration with this boat moving in all different directions, and your other analogy of jigsaw pieces. What needs to happen next if it is going to deliver in the way that you hope?
I mean, in a way, there is a bit. There's a bit too much agreement in our boat. So, but I can't really differ to what you're saying, Kalypso and Daniel. But I want to strengthen one thing: there needs to be more dispute, more discussions, more discussions on various topics. So we've had enough discussions of processes and how things work and who's in power and in the driver's seat and whatever. We need this agreement in the conference. And therefore, I was actually quite happy when the Hungarian Prime Minister said, well, I want to reduce the power of the European Parliament, because that triggers some real debate, and we need the attention of the media in order to get some real public discussion. So of course I do not agree with Viktor Orban, but I agree with him that we need to have serious discussions about the future of EU democracy, about the way we're doing politics in the EU. So can it be a success? I mean, it can, but I think it very much depends on the political dynamic. So there is a lot of member states who do not have any interest at all in the conference, who are very skeptical about the conference. So they need to be convinced in a way, but they're only getting convinced if they see there is a discussion unfolding where they have to take a stance. So, and then we're getting into another situation where the conference actually can lead to some tangible results. And it will also depend, I think, from autumn on whether it is possible to link ongoing discussions in the EU with discussions in the conference. Yeah. Because, as I said, the attention of the media will be key for all the different processes and the conference itself.
Thank you. And your point about different countries and how seriously they're taking this process, Stefan Lutgenau in our audience says, in my experience, we have a very asymmetric debate. While we see an active debate in parts of the Union, we have almost no debate in Hungary or Bulgaria, or a very strange debate in Romania, at least when we look at the platform. There is nor strategy nor means to bridge this democratic gap that has a destructive potential. Daniel, in terms of that political interplay that Dominik was talking about there, but also in terms of citizens, when we asked people after our last conference conversations what they most wanted us to talk about, we kept coming back to the role of the citizens in this process, how to make sure their voice really matters, really counts. Because you've said, and you've said it in videos and you said it here, a chance to shape the agenda and the slogan, the future is yours. But there's a lot of questioning out there of whether that will actually be the case at the end, or it will go back to the horse trading between politicians that the EU is so fond of. How do we make sure it delivers?
I think it works if it works, kind of thing, right? If citizens do engage with this, it will be very, very hard to ignore them, even for those that want to ignore the citizen's voice. Whereas if the engagement levels stay the way that they have been so far, right? If it's just a couple of thousand of citizens that have in some shape or form engaged with this conference, well, then it's easy to dismiss this as not representative. This is not the citizen's voice, so we don't listen. So in a way, you know, those of us that are in the plenary or even in the board, we need the citizens, because then I can always go back and say, look, but the citizens made those proposals. Those are the proposals that we need to discuss. Those are the proposals that need to be in the conference conclusions, and they need to be translated into
Dominik's
law.
point about politicizing it, you talked about the next elections and either defending or criticizing what emerges. He's saying, and maybe it links to your point right at the beginning about they should have talked about a topic. We need to have proper debate where people disagree. Would you agree with that?
Well, and I mean, even before Orban took to the different newspapers across Europe, I said, you know, there are people like Viktor Orban that have a very different idea about the future of Europe than my own, for example, but he needs to come to the conference. He needs to be there, explain what he has in mind with his walling in the Christian nation to protect it from I don't know what, and then we have a debate, and then someone like me can say what my idea is about where the future of Europe lies, and then it's up to citizens, it's up to the voters to decide who has the better plan for the future. But I think we should not shy away from that debate, and I'm a bit disappointed that Orban, for now, is the only head of state and government that has actually come with concrete proposals for the conference. You know, so I hope that the pro-Europeans, that those, you know, that want positive change for the Union rather than just abolishing the European Parliament or something, that they come out of the woodworks, that they come with their ideas, and that we have that debate.
That's interesting, because just a couple of questions that came from our audience from last time. Francesco Mazzaferro said, how do we bring the conference to the center of the EU policy discussion? And as you say, if the member states don't engage and we don't link it to the ongoing topics, as Dominik was saying, that's not going to happen. And Laura Galante asked about the importance of transparency in this process of deliberation. What's working well, what needs to be improved? Kalypso, the key for you to get this right mix of finding those citizens, reaching out beyond the usual suspects, which we all keep talking about, but also the politics of this and getting the engagement. Is it, as Daniel's suggesting, we have to sort of do this bottom up? If we can get citizens to really engage, then the politicians who are tempted to ignore it won't be able to. Is that the answer?
Well, indeed, but Jacki, what does it mean, really engage? How do we know? How do we do it? I mean, in fact, there is a well of experience out there, especially in the last 20 years, but, you know, going back to Pericles and ancient Greece on how do you do citizens panel and random sortition. It's not like we need to reinvent the wheel. You know, we've had the Irish Citizens Assembly, the French Convention Climat, the Ost-Belgian experiment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, OECD just republished a new version of their wonderful report on the participatory wave. I mean, so much to think about and to draw lessons from, which we try to do also in collaboration with Dominik and the observatory. I mean, we're all trying to think together about those lessons, right? So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, but at the same time, we've never done this kind of thing in a transnational way, having to translate in 24 languages. You know, if you bring 200 citizens somewhere to debate in a citizens assembly, you know, how do you square the circle that they need to be isolated because you wanted them to have their own process, according to certain methodology and at the same time kind of create a buzz, involve civil society. Those two things seem to be in contradiction. So I would say, well, a number of to react, first of all, to Laura Galante's question, and Laura is a wonderful, participant in our action in the Citizens Take Over Europe, where we have listed 10 wonderful principles for these processes, including transparency, accountability, inclusivity, visibility, and all of these principles. I direct you to that website. But also, I would reacting to what Daniel say, hey, Orban came, but no one else. And also to Dominik, I would just be careful that we don't create an us versus them in this conference, that it all becomes pro-European versus anti-Europeans, because there is much more at stake. It's more subtle, and citizens are more subtle. And that brings me a last comment, Jacki, on Dominik's such important point about, what we call agonistics, conflict. That in the end, these debates, whether there's in the citizens panel, whether it's the platform, whether it's the plenary, need to be framed, I think, in terms of trade-offs. We know from the climate debates, it's all about end of the month versus end of the world, short-term, long-term. That's very hard. Who's going to sacrifice and how? Refugees, should we all take in some refugees, or should others do other things? They're really hard questions to be asked. And the last trade-off I would really put on the table, because there's so many we can think of, difficult tensions, is indeed democracy itself. All of this participation that we're talking about. Is that a clever way to give up direct democracy forever? Or is it complementary to it? All of these are difficult questions, and I couldn't agree more with both Daniel, with all of my co-panelists, that we need to put on the table conflictual questions. Absolutely. And this
Thank you. Calypso, I'd like to come back to that question of its relationship with direct democracy and so on in a little while. But Corina, in this discussion that we're having here about really two worlds, as Kalypso put it, and how you bring those two worlds together, how you bring the citizens' elements together with this complicated political interplay that's going on, and this lack of active engagement by EU institutions, lack of engagement by some member states. How do you begin to make this a genuine conference that brings all these together, do you think?
Well, in theory, we have an ingenious setup. And I think we focused until now on the details of the process, because we should have focused on the details of the process, and now we'll test it in practice. And I think it remains to be seen whether the different interplays and the dynamics that have been theoretically foreseen between institutions and citizens, the citizens at the European level, at the national level, in the different panels, coming together with all sorts of other stakeholders in the plenaries, will actually bear fruit. But that remains to be seen. We are entering, after this summer, the phase in which we will begin the real conversations, where we will get down to business about the different topics and issues, and hopefully controversy, and hopefully important synergies will be born. But I think we've done the best we could in setting up a process that theoretically should function to achieve something. We'll see what that something is after the summer break.
I want to come to the substance and what we should be talking about after the summer, but before we move on from the ingenious setup, in our last event, Gisela Erler asked, how do you link the plenary discussions and the results of the assemblies? How does this interaction really work? Daniel, for you, I don't know which analogy worked better for you at the beginning, the idea of this flotilla of boats all circling together, or this relay race idea that it sort of has a logical, fairly clear and neat progress. As someone who's on the inside track, how do you see this interplay between the 5 Ps that Anna Paula Zacharias was talking about in practice? And then we'll move to substance and what we should be talking about. We'll take some audience questions as well.
Well, I would very much hope that it is a relay race. So far, none of this is set in stone. So far, there's different bits happening disconnected from each other, and nobody knows. I don't know, at least, and I haven't heard anyone else that knows how exactly this is going to work. We're going to I mean, we have a board meeting on Monday where I think the agenda setting for the citizens panels is on the agenda. I don't know. I have made a proposal on how this should work. Whether that's at the end how it is going to work, I don't know.
What have you suggested briefly?
Well, since we couldn't agree on one precise question per panel, I said, let's at least, come up with a list of precise questions, and the citizens themselves decide which of these questions they would like answered. Because if you give citizens 6 days, over 3 weekends to discuss, and you leave the topic as climate change, the environment, and health, good luck. So solving half the world's problems in a weekend and a half, so to speak.
Well, let's see what happens to your idea. But Dominik, come in.
Yeah, I just want to come in because I mean Daniel's policy is all about transparency. So I'm really happy that he's very transparent also about the process, because I think overall I agree with Kalypso, of course. So it is a big innovation. Yeah, it's a democratic endeavor, and it is the process we've got at hand. So we've got to deal with it. But of course, there is a lot of risks. I mean, the good thing is there is a lot going on. The bad thing is there is a lot going on. So if you try to explain the conference to the outside world, you just fail. Yeah, it's just utterly complex. It's very, very, very difficult to explain. And I mean, because Daniel was mentioning the citizens panels, I mean, they've got very broad topics at the moment. And if you give broad topics to a lot of citizens, you're rather getting probably broad results. So, I mean, what the team, I think, is currently doing, that is preparing the panels, is trying to find a system that is kind of funnel shaped, that at the end of the day will lead to concrete ideas, to concrete proposals. But then you've got the proposals, and the plenary has to deal with the proposals. And everyone is saying, yes, we need a very structured and clear follow-up process. But a clear follow-up process might lead to results in a year, or it might lead to results a little bit earlier on. And my experience is, of course, in such a process, and especially if you have the attention of the media, citizens and participants, they want to see immediate results as well. And this is a tricky thing. I don't have a solution to that, but this is very tricky. And just looking at the presidencies, we had 3, so 1 down, the Portuguese, 2 to go, I would say, but time is accelerating, really. And there is not much time left until the end.
And indeed, there is a question here. I'll bring you back in, Daniel, but just as Shunlao says, will there be enough time in only 3 or 4 months, or do we need an extension beyond the French elections, or is some time pressure necessary to reach an end point? Another question, Machak, I cannot pronounce the surname correctly, but I'll give it a go. Jazrabiek says the timing is clearly oriented by the French presidential elections. How do you see this in the context of the next European Parliament elections? How do we get to what happens between now and May 2024? And also, Daniel, the German elections this autumn, will we have a German government that can get its act together on the conference, a new government of whatever political colour that can get its act together and really make a significant input into these discussions in time? How do you see all these swirling political developments in this?
So far, pressure was needed to actually get anywhere. And we have had to make painful compromises along the way to actually get anything going. What I wanted to complement what Dominik said earlier is, I mean, it also depends on what's the expectation management, and I fear a bit that too many, particularly among the governments right now, are like, okay, let the citizens come up with these endless lists of proposals, right? And if we come out of this conference with like a book of, here is 300 things we could change about the European Union, I fear we're setting ourselves up for disappointment and failure. Because out of these 300 things, I don't think anything will actually be will be done. Then we have just this long list of things we didn't do that the citizens wanted, and I think there's more chance of success if we focus on a few projects. 1, 2, 3 things. If already one thing came out of this conference that actually changed something, well, then you can sell it as a success, right? And you don't, as I said, don't expect to fix all the EU's problems now in a year's time. But if this process fixes one problem, well, then I'm going to go back and say, look, this worked. This type of citizen participation worked. It delivered a solution for this problem. Now let's try it on the next problem that we have, right?
Come back on what that problem that you think it should fix first should be. But Corina, I think you wanted to react to what Daniel said.
Yes, in general to the discussion that we're having, because I think that at the end of the day, it's insufficient or limiting in some sense to assess success or to assess real change only in terms of reforms and in terms of a report. Yes, of course, a document with serious, meaningful proposals for reforms that will put the EU and European citizens in a better and safer position that will prepare them better for the future will matter. But I think that the end won't justify the means. The means matter here as well. And making sure, for example, that those who participate develop ownership of the results on the way, but also the end result will be just important, if not more so than whatever report or outcome we have out of this. And if we lose those who engage because they no longer understand the dynamics of the process or how their input matters, I think we will fail, even if there are amazing ideas for reform at the end.
Kalypso, so far, I looked at the website this morning, nearly 5,500 ideas have been put onto the platform. So never mind Daniel's 300, we could be in the thousands. How do you see this question of the balance of discussing lots of things citizens care about versus focus, but also the balance between talking about institutional questions, democracy, processes for the future, how the EU works and what the EU does? Where for you does the right balance lie in that conversation?
Wow, this is difficult, isn't it? And one is tempted to echo Daniel's expectation management. After all, Daniel is a great idealist, but he's also a politician, and politicians need to manage expectations, sure. But I agree with Corina in that, she says, if I can translate Corina or say it in another way, maybe what really matters is the process here. Exactly for the reasons that Daniel can't do anything about the fact that there will be 5,000, in fact, 50,000 proposals on the digital platform. The 4 Citizens Assembly Trans-European will generate a whole bunch of others, and then all the national, local, it will be an effervescence. And so in a way, that's kind of unavoidable if you have an experiment like this. All the more unavoidable if politicians, Daniel knows this, but many politicians don't always internalize the fact that, democracy is about unpredictability. It's a mode of, it's not like autocracy. So you don't really know what will, put it in the ballot box, shake well, you don't know what comes out. That's the amazing, thrilling things about democracy. You can't predict, guys. So sorry, don't try to say what will come at the end of the relay road, because that's the point. But then we have Corina's, ownership. Okay, so if we are able to create some sort of ownership among, first of all, a kind of elite citizens who will be part of the assemblies, who will, write in the digital platform, that's still a tiny minority. But if somehow their families and friends and people hear about it and there's a bit of a buzz, yes, there will be some ownership, let's see how much. But then, Corina, wouldn't you agree with me that once you own something, it's really hard to let go, right? So, oh my God, I own this nice piece of clothes or furniture or whatever. And if that's the case, then the greatest challenge of the conference will be to think through how we make some of these innovations permanent, like a permanent citizens assembly, like a permanent platform, digital platform, which actually will exist at many levels, just like the current platform is inspired by the Barcelona platform. So you link the municipality and the trans-European and the national. Okay, so let's think about how we make this permanent. That's what I hear from, Corina's ownership point. And so if we do that, then basically we're combining, the expert intelligence on which the EU is based today, including politicians as experts, but also AI, artificial intelligence, which is trying to kind of make some order out of this chaos, including for the digital platform, and then collective intelligence, which is among our citizens. Whoa, that's an amazing agenda. So let's not wish for some sort of order that will come out just before President Macron has French elections, in 9 months' time. Let's accept the unpredictability and try to make it a kind of image for the future.
Thank you. Dominik, to this question of whether we want, and I like the word Calypso used, an effervescence of topics, or we want a narrower focus to deliver some clear results that people can see. And if it is to become permanent, people will want to see that there was a point to it all. Where do you lie on this balance? And also of where we're discussing the how and the what, where do you think that balance should lie?
I mean, it goes back to the question that kind of Daniel answered partly, I think, what is a success? What is a success for the conference? So, and I think the conference is a success if it leads to a change in the way we do democracy in the EU. So if we get a more coherent participation infrastructure, Kalypso and Corina were alluding to. So I think that is a success, but this wouldn't be probably a success for the citizens and the politicians who are participating in the conference. So we need some more tangible results. So, and this is of course clear policy outcomes. And I still go back to the point I always have: institutional reform. And I think we've got a debate we didn't have for a couple of years about qualified majority voting. So I think that goes into the conference. So that's an ongoing debate, and there's a real chance that we see some tangible results coming out of that. But I'd like to go back also again to the more critical things, like the discussion platform. So overall, I think it's a really good invention, and I agree with Kalypso that we can combine different sorts of intelligence, but the thing is also we mustn't forget the way the media looks at these processes, and we shouldn't paint it in a too rosy picture. And when I go at the discussion platform today, I see there are 19,416 participants. And just comparing that to the summertime consultation back in 2018, where there were more than 3 million participants, I immediately know what quite a few journalists would write about the conference. And this is a risk. We've got to face it. And there needs to be more efforts going into the platform, more marketing. We need really politicians pointing at the platform. And if the platform doesn't get any traction, so it will be difficult to get positive publicity.
Sure, but that's a bit of a chicken and egg, because Christine Clev from our audience point says, I think one of the problems with the conference is that neither the average citizen nor the media are really aware of the conference and the chances it offers. In any case, the media appear not to be too enthusiastic about communicating. Well, if they don't communicate, then you don't get the outreach, you don't get exactly what you're talking about. But Daniel, let me come, and I wanted to pick up on what Dominik just said about qualified majority voting, because in your intervention at the opening plenary, you talked about the design flaw that needs to be fixed, and you were focusing very much on this question. For you, that's how we do it, but you linked it very clearly to certain topics. So for you, let's make it more than one problem, but if this, you said at the beginning, maybe 2 or 3 problems, what for you would be those 2 or 3 problems that you think it could fix, and how does it fix them? What do you actually want us to talk about?
Well, I would hope that we can make progress on the question of abolishing unanimity where it still prevails, on foreign policy, on taxation, on social issues. I think, I mean, would I say today that we definitely get rid of unanimity in all areas with this conference? I think then we would have done very well for ourselves. So that's very optimistic, but I think we need to have that discussion. Second discussion I think that I very much want to have is the question of money. We have now, with this recovery fund, for the first time, taken out a loan together and said we invest this money in our common future, in sustainability, fight against climate change, and digitization. If you look at the need for investment to make this continent climate neutral, as we have all agreed we will do, we need about 25 to 30 billion, not billion, trillion in English, right? Billion in German, but trillion euros to fund that. We're starting now with 750 billion. That's a good start, but we need way more. So I think we need to discuss, what we have started with the RRF now. How are we going to use this mid and long term for the transition of our European economy? Because it just makes an eminent sense that we do this together rather than 27 countries for themselves. It's cheaper, it's more secure, it's easier to do it together. And then the last thing that I think, and this is probably the point where I also would see that the success chances are highest, is the way that the European elections work. Because we cannot go back to the ballot box in 24 with the same we did in 2019. We cannot go back out with Spitzenkandidaten, but then have to admit, well, we don't really know what you're voting for, and you're electing some members of the European Parliament, and then afterwards there's going to be a big surprise, and the European Council is going to come with someone that you have never heard of before.
Just to follow up on that very quickly, do you also want this conference to talk about fundamental values? Because you have been very active, particularly recently, in terms of the rule of law question, Hungary, and linking this and calling on the EU to use its new powers, calling on the Commission to suspend funding and so on. Is that a conversation you think fits? Because Dominik said at the beginning, we need to link it to things we're talking about in active politics now. Is that a link you would make in the conference? And then I want to come to Corina and Kalypso also about what we should be talking about in substance terms, what you would focus on, and Kalypso, particularly what the democratic question you ask citizens is. But Daniel, should we talk fundamental values, or is it?
I think so. I mean, it's unavoidable, yet I also hope, the conference is a slow process, even if we do on the current time plan, it will deliver in a year's time. I don't think that on a question like the rule of law in Hungary, we have a year. I want the Commission to go in now and protect the rule of law. They have the tools, they have the possibility if the political will is there. So by all means, let's have that conversation, about our values and what role for the EU in this field, but that shouldn't keep us from doing what's necessary right now and using the tools that we already have.
Thank you. Kalypso, for you, on the side, you raised the question about the relationship between participatory democracy, representational democracy, and so on. What is the question you think the conference, when it comes to this reinvention of democracy, what's the question you would be asking the citizens to discuss and debate in their panels so that we can come to something?
Well, Jacki, as we were describing, of course, there will be panels. First of all, the 4 Europeans one will be on different topics, from the environment to trade to foreign policy, etc. So they have to discuss the questions that are relevant to these themes. And as Daniel was saying, specific questions. And just to amend your reading of what I said, I mean, you said Kalypso wants effervescence. In a way, sure, I love effervescence, that the effervescence of life and champagne together, but
I'm with you on that one.
but in a way, what I'm saying is effervescence is unavoidable, whether we like it or not. It's just going to happen. Stuff will happen, and at different level in different places. So the question is how we channel it, but we can't just deny it. It will happen. Now, then there are these topics, of course, these topics of EU policies. And there, I mean, I totally agree with Daniel. The best discussions are when there are hard trade-offs and conflictual issues. But then, in fact, I would pick up, so there's a question of the substance of the question and then the method. I mean, on the substance, can I echo what Daniel just said? Follow the money. Citizens, in the end, there is no taxation without representation. No, my new slogan is no taxation without participation. And so, we have this new recovery fund, 750 billion. Sure, might be funded down the road by a tax on corporation, but at the end of the day, we kind of pay as citizens. And this is where I propose, Jacki, my democratic panopticon, because what I want to say there is that it's kind of interesting that it's very, very hard. And I looked at it with my students at EUI and at Oxford, to know how these different projects exactly whose pocket the money is going to, according to what criteria, etc. Now, it might sound technical, but actually there are loads of individual citizens, but also organizations out there who want to check that. So I would like all of this to be transparent on a website so citizens can actually take ownership, to echo Corina, of the process of following the money. And that in turn will serve our values question, because if you have Hungarian and Polish and Bulgarian, citizens able to know where the money of these projects go and say something about it,
okay,
then we empower them in the same way as their cities are voting for the opposition.
Sorry, bringing you very brief.
No, on the method.
If it's very quick, but I want to bring in a couple of questions and I want to bring in Corina as well.
Because then at the end of the day, Dominik was asking, well, how do we go to 3 million or 30 million or, the marketing thing? And I would say that, we need to think hard about how the panels and the digital platform, there will be recommendations. Then they perhaps can go to preferenda, to votes that are not yes or no, but where people kind of rank things, and then that might then have an impact on the EP election or national election.
Okay, Kalypso, I'm going to have to stop you because we're coming to the end, and I want to bring Corina in, take a couple of questions, and then I want to put you all on the spot before we finish. Corina, in terms of what we should be talking about, you said we have the ingenious setup now, we need to get down to business on topics. Where would you focus, and would you have a big list or a very short list?
Well, I feel like saying that it doesn't matter what I think, because what's important is what citizens will want to discuss. As far as I'm concerned, and I'm repeating myself a little bit with earlier, I feel that what's important is that the conversation that we're having is inclusive and is open and is frank, and we're going beyond the win-win discussions, and we're facing the trade-offs that have been mentioned and all of that. And I feel that again, the results will matter, and probably there will be some results, but the process
is what matters.
And look, the other reason why the process is important is because these citizens, which are the stars of the show, so to say, they're not alone. They will be coming together with representatives of institutions, EU bodies, civil society, national parliaments, MEPs, experts, and so on. And just the mere fact of having conversations in which you understand other people's point of views, and in which young people who will be participating and have been allocated a space in this process will understand the complexity of decisions and on topics. I mean, look at all of these topics
we've got to move on.
Relevance, but of global relevance. I think that in itself will be important just as much as whatever results we'll get out of this. And if I
Corina, I'm going to have to stop you because I have three questions. I'm going to do a quick fire because the audience have lots of questions. Mina Alanda asks, not all member states are committed to follow up on the conference results. However, it is necessary to have all of them on board since they will have the last word on most things in the EU. How could the other institutions pressure the council to commit itself properly? Citizen participation that again leads nowhere is likely to backfire. In a couple of sentences, Daniel, as a member of the Parliament's delegation and an observer, how can you put the pressure on the council to take note?
Well, everyone that wants change needs to team up. And if already we have a dynamic where national members of parliament, European Parliament, civil society, and citizens are united on we want change and we can agree on some of these change projects, then it becomes more difficult. And then the further we reach out, the more public pressure there is, the more difficult it is for governments to just say no to everything and strike out with their big red marker.
Thank you. And
may I just
Dominik,
add, sorry, Jacki, may I just add, I mean, we shouldn't forget, I mean, the conference is not an institutional process that is kind of set in stone and where every pathway is clear from the beginning on. I mean, the key word is really pressure. It's political pressure that needs to happen. And the conference is part of politics. So it's EU politics we're doing with the conference. So, and therefore, if we have some alliances with regard to some topics, yes, that creates pressure and others will have to react. If there is no pressure, no publicity, it will just implode.
And Dominik, I think this one's to you because you were talking about the numbers of people and number of participants. You quoted that figure of 19,400 and something. Anthony Zeski asks, how can the platform be upgraded to handle a much larger number of participants? The legibility of proposals is already poor. If you imagine 10 times the number, it will need some in-person moderation. So if you've got your dream and millions of people get involved on the platform, how are they going to manage it?
Well, now we're talking, of course, about the nitty-gritty of the platform and platform management and what an alternative platform should look like. I mean, the platform is rather complex. Yes, it could be easier, but it is the platform we have. So, and it is not a bad platform when we especially talk about the multilingual dimension. But the thing is that people need to know something happens with their results. So it needs to be attractive for them to participate. So, and I would say it's a rather minor question at the beginning whether the platform is A or B, is black or white. Okay. So it needs to be attractive for people. And a lot of people apparently think it's not attractive yet.
Okay, Corina, one sentence, literally.
Yes, I wanted to also say that the numbers matter, but also we should look at the composition. Where are these people coming from? What member states? Because in the initiative that Dominik mentioned about the summer clock changes,
it was very German.
It was mostly Germany, and also for the European citizens consultations questionnaire, we had a number of countries that were predominant, and so we should also look at what countries are getting engaged and which ones are not, and why.
Which goes back to the point that was made by one of our audience members at the beginning about Eastern Europe. And one more quick one, Daniel, and then I want to ask Daniel and Kalypso a final question. You mentioned you wish we'd gone straight to a convention. We have a question here from Daniela Vanchik, who says, what lessons can a potential new European convention learn from the Conference on the Future of Europe or from the last convention? Will it be it could be a better process because we had the conference first, no?
Yeah, no, that's that very clearly, and I think the clearest lesson is the citizens' participation. That's the biggest fix we did, right? Not to have it in a backroom deal, but to have it out in the open and with the citizens at the table from the start. I think that's the lesson that we're trying to draw. And if the conference works, the convention can go quickly because all the players of the convention are in the conference. We don't need to restart the debate from zero afterwards.
Thank you. And just to read a comment from Gerd Schoenfelder, who says, agrees with you, Daniel, less is often more, and it certainly is here regarding both the process and content. The best that could happen would be a limited set of concrete, actionable proposals developed by citizens, preferably challenging and going further than what politicians have already floated themselves. We are almost out of time, and I do want to finish on time. So I want to ask our two guests today, the same question I'm asking all our guests on Conference Conversations, and it links to something European Commission Vice President and co-chair of the conference, Dubravka Šuica, said in March. She said, the conference will enable citizens from every corner of the European Union and from all our backgrounds to share their ideas, hopes, and dreams in shaping their union's future. Kalypso, to you first in 1 minute. What is your dream? What is your dream outcome of this conference and why?
Jacki, we've said in this wonderful hour with your dynamic chairing that, you know, there is a realist dream, like a realist utopia, which is that it will trigger a few reforms under the pressure that Dominik is talking about. But to the extent that it doesn't entirely do that, I hope it will not just trigger, but inspire change the vision of radical transparency and participation, which requires using other means, not just the traditional politics, but also art, theater, storytelling, and perhaps make happen what I advocated 20 years ago in the previous convention, which was a Woodstock of European politics, especially appealing to young people who are starving for festivals after this pandemic. So that's
also those of us old enough to vaguely remember Woodstock. Daniel, for you, what is your one dream, one thing you hope that will emerge above all else, that one problem you want fixed? If you have to just pick the one.
Well, that we take the next step of integration, right? And that we thereby prove that, our democratic project at the European level is still reasonably young, that it is still capable of taking that next step of being reformed, because the union is incomplete. It has always been a process of gradual steps. It's time for the next step. So I hope.
And on that note, we are out of time, but I want to thank you all very much indeed for a great discussion. I wish we had 2 hours, 3 hours, but as you said, somebody said earlier, time pressure is needed for the conference to deliver, and it's also probably a good discipline for our conversations. So thank you very much, and thank you to all of you for your great questions. We will be back after the summer break, and the Conference Observatory at that point is going to really intensify its activities in September as those first European citizens panels get underway, begin their discussions. In the meantime, do urge you to follow the Conference Observatory on Twitter. You can keep constantly informed about what's happening, further activities in the framework of the Observatory, and get updates on the conference proceedings themselves, developments and analysis of those developments and what they mean. And again, in the spirit of participatory democracy and echoing what is happening at the conference, once again, in a moment, you will see a question appear on your screen. We'd really like to hear from you again as to the sort of questions you'd like us to discuss with future guests on Conference Conversations. We used some of them today, and that very much helped me to frame this conversation. So please do keep those ideas coming in. You'll see the question come up in just a moment. But thank you, Daniel, Kalypso, Corina, Dominik. Have a wonderful summer, and I'll see you back here in September.
Thank you.
Thanks to you,
Right,
Jacki.
thank you.
Bye.
Ciao.
Thank you.